Hi, my name is Caroline Boutard-Hunt. I'm the agricultural educator of CC Yates County, and I am here today to talk to you about some fantastic indoor gardening kits and, show you a little bit about how to plant one up. Well, what are these garden kits? Well, CC East Steuben, which is our neighbor, applied for a fantastic grant with us and several other CC county offices, including CC Schuyler, CC Tioga, CC Chemung, and us. And this is a wonderful way to get started gardening. These include 3 pots. You can see nice little pots. A nice big bag of potting mix that will fill all of these generously with a little bit left over if you have another pot you want to plant up. And 3 types of seed from Fruition Seeds, which is a local seed company located in Naples, New York. These are fantastic varieties for growing in pots, and I'll go through them really quickly, and then we'll pot these up and show you kind of some tricks of the trade with these. So first off, we have Scallions. These are a fantastic hardy variety. You get that from the name. That grow beautifully in pots. They can be, one thing I like about Scallions is that you can just eat the white part at the bottom, but I actually use the whole thing for cooking. So I'll chop that up, and they're wonderful. And when it gets colder, you can keep them outside probably till November, and they will just get sweeter and sweeter in cool weather. Next variety I have is winter density lettuce. And as you can get from the name, this also does really well in cool weather. So this is a great variety to plant now and enjoy in about, well, if you like baby lettuce, in about a month, month and a half. If you like bigger heads, which I'll show you how you can plant for those, you enjoy those in about anywhere from 50 days. They say 50 days, I believe, on the packet. I found it's 50 days to, you can enjoy this lettuce. You've got a lot of time to kind of enjoy your heads. And finally, we have something that's not hardy at all, Genovese Basil. But this is a wonderful one to start this time of year, so you have some fresh, fragrant basil that you can bring inside when the weather starts getting cool and enjoy a little bit more of summer. So we've got our pots here. And one thing that I get asked about a lot is whether people should put gravel at the bottom of the pots. Well, for this project, no, I would not recommend that. It will actually lower the amount of soil that the plants have to grow through, and it will cause some drainage issues. Actually, when the soil kind of filters down into that gravel, it can really actually fill in those holes. So for larger pots, if you were planting like one of those big fancy pots and you want to actually ever be able to move it, sometimes I'll recommend making kind of a bag with I've used pantyhose before and filled them with packing peanuts and putting those at the bottom to kind of lighten a pot, but that's really not for drainage. These drainage holes will be perfect for this situation. What matters more also for drainage is to make sure you're using potting mix. And the other question I get sometimes is, can I just use garden soil? My garden grows great plants. Why can't I just put it in pots? Well, there are a couple reasons for that. The first reason for that is that it's not sterile. So you're starting out with little seedlings, and sometimes you're going to have bacteria and fungi in there that will really enjoy your little seedling roots, especially if you're not quite perfect with how much water and it's a little too wet. You can get some diseases like pythium growing. The other thing is garden soil has wormholes in it. It is actually in layers in your garden, or it should be. And when you dig it up and plop it in this pot and water it, it really mixes up those layers, and it can really not be too dense for plants to grow through easily. So I recommend using a potting mix. Now, this will come with a bag of potting mix, but if you are buying potting mix, make sure when you are starting out with something where you're growing pots for the whole season, make sure you're not buying seedling mix and you're buying a soilless potting mix. The difference between a seedling mix and other potting mixes is that seedling mixes are great for tiny, tiny seedlings, and commercial nurseries will use this to start plants off and then transplant them into other soilless mixes. They don't generally have any fertilizer, and the reason I'm mentioning this to you is because one year I bought seedling mix without realizing it, and I could not understand why my plants were turning yellow. I was like, I just planted them there, this beautiful mix, what is going on? The minute they start putting on leaves, there's no fruit in that mix. So it's an easily solved problem for me, but I'm just warning you if you're buying mix. Now, this mix looks nice. I've got some in this bowl. It's very fluffy, which is good. but this is too dry for seedlings. So what we're going to do is moisten this up. So I actually brought water today in a gallon jug. And it's a little bit like a cooking experiment. You're going to just sort of cooking, not baking. You're going to add some, and then you're going to mix it in. You can use a spoon for this, and you know that's kind of nice with kids. That's why I like to do this outside. The library's table is going to get really dirty pretty quick. But I'm trying to mix it up. And what I want in a texture is I want it still to be kind of a little fluffy, but when I squeeze it, it kind of sticks together a bit. Do you see how that's sort of that in-between point? Now, this is not the only water we're going to do for these seedlings, but this is going to make it easier to get kind of the right texture of soil in the pots. So our first pot we're going to pot up, I think we'll do the lettuce first. So I'm going to put this right in here. I may need to mix up some more in a second because it's a little hard to tell. I like to pat it down as I'm going, just, you know, so you see how there's a little bit of bounce in that? My hand can bounce off it. I'm not like pushing it down, but I'm trying to give them a nice firm place to settle in their roots. Soil will also compact a little bit, so I'm actually going to mix up a little bit more. But I also want to leave enough room at the top so that it's easy to water later. Because if your soil is right up to the surface, you're going to have issues with the water spilling over the top. And it's hard to get enough water in the pots. So now we've got a pot filled up. I'm going to, I forgot a towel. Hands. You do want your hands a little dry to handle your seed because this is tiny seed. So for the basil seed, I'll show you how small. All these seeds are actually pretty small seeds. Let's see. And I'm just going to put this out here. This is more seed than I would use in this pot. This has, usually seed packets have maybe 250 seeds in them, or 100 seeds in this packet. So that's way too many plants for this pot. So I'm using about 1/4 of the seeds, maybe half the seeds if I'm worried about them germinating. Now what I'm doing now is I'm just sprinkling them on the soil surface. This is easier to do than trying to make little holes because these seeds are very small. They don't need to be very deep. So I've just sprinkled them over the surface. Now I'm going to get a little bit more mix. I'm making this a little drier than before because I really need to be able to sprinkle it. So what I go is I kind of go like this and I rub my hands together and it makes a nice little layer on top of the soil. These should not be deeper than 1/4 inch. And this is another really important thing about seeds. It's always better to plant shallower than deeper. Plants will run out of energy before they get to the top if they are too deep. Shallow plants can send their roots down much more quickly. So always err on the side of caution. Now this is potted up. What I'm going to do, I'm not going to show this because I do not have a second bowl to use. But what I will do after this is I'm actually going to get a baking dish, kind of one of the Pyrex ones, and I'm going to fill that with water and stick this right in and let the whole pot soak for about an hour. What that's going to do is really saturate all the soil in here evenly. And that is a much better way to water something with small seedlings than trying to overhead water. You can damage the seedlings, and also this way the whole pot has even moisture. And with plants, it's always better to, thanks Alex, I can't operate a computer and do this.
No worries.
It's always better to water deeply, less frequently than everyday watering. So what's going to happen when your basil comes up is that you're going to have a lot of plants there. So let's say we planted half that and all the seedlings came up. That's 50 basil plants in a pot that's maybe 1 foot wide. That is way too many plants. So what you're going to do is you are actually going to look at the pot and remove the trimmings, remove the little seedlings. You can put them in salad when they're little. They're delicious. You just clip them with a pair of scissors and leave maybe 4 or 5 plants in here. And then as they get bigger, you're going to leave maybe 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 plants. So you're going to give them enough room that there's going to be airflow between. Because one thing that kills basil a lot is when you get kind of mildew infections and you don't have enough airflow and drainage. So these guys, they come with package instructions. I water them once they're up and growing and have true leaves, which means not the little leaves that come out of the surface, but that second and third set of leaves. I water them probably every 2 to 3 days in the ground. In a pot, I'd water them every day to every other day. You want to stick your finger down to about here. And if it's dry to past your first knuckle, then you know you need to water. But overwatering and underwatering are both issues. Where you're going to put this pot when it's all ready to go is they love full sun. But if you have a spot kind of where they're going to get full sun, but also underneath, so you get a heavy rainfall when they're really little, that will wash them out of the pot. So put them somewhere where they're not going to be exposed to a lot of heavy rain, but will get full sun during the day. They like about 6 to 8 hours of full sun. If they get really wilty there, because you have a very small environment in the pot, you have very low tolerance for dry or wet, then move them somewhere a little shadier, and they'll do fine. And in fact, when you get closer, it starts getting cooler and cooler, I recommend moving them into the shade a bit just to get them used to lower light conditions. Because when you move them into their house, they're suddenly going to be going from full sun to, even in a sunny window, it's actually a fairly shady environment for a plant. So this way you kind of acclimate them to that change before they go inside. And I wouldn't expect your basil to last all winter, but it should get you through at least most of the fall inside. And then don't throw the pot away when the plants are kind of finished. Take the plants out, put that pot in the garage maybe, and then in the spring you can use that potting mix again and again until it totally breaks down for various other plants. You could plant lettuce in it early spring, some more of this lettuce. We're going to have plenty of lettuce seed. You could plant that. You could plant some of the scallions later, or just put flowers in it. And it's totally, you don't need to waste it at all. I've used the same potting mix for various plants for years, and then when it gets really worn out, I use it, just for my annual flowers, and it works great. So now we're going to do the same thing for our lettuce. Lettuce is a little different than the other two plants we're growing. Lettuce actually needs light to germinate. So if you plant lettuce, it's much safer to just put it on the soil surface than try to figure out the depth. If you do worry about the depth, you can put I always feel better putting a little sprinkle of soil on it, but it really is more for me than the lettuce. It's the same, I think foxgloves or snapdragons are the same way. If they don't have that light, the seeds will just sit and not germinate. So, and they will germinate fairly quickly compared to the other two plants. You probably have your first lettuce seedlings within 5 to 7 days. If you're waiting around for your basil and your basil will probably take a week to 10 days. Always give them a little extra time before you replant. Because one thing I've always done is I'll get impatient and I'll say, oh, these seeds aren't coming up, and I'll plant something else on top of them. And then I'll end up with a big mess because the first seeds come up. So we're filling the pot up just like we did before. So we've got that little bit of spring. And the lettuce leaves, this is this is actually one of my absolute favorite varieties. You can grow this as a baby lettuce, which is like what you get in the store, like mesclun mix or whatever. They're just little lettuce plants. Or you can grow this for head lettuce, which I much prefer. I like a big, meaty head of lettuce that I can make a whole salad out of. But I'm going to show you quickly how to do it for baby lettuce, and we'll talk about a different method to do it for head lettuce. So here's the pot. Same deal as before. I'm just sprinkling these in. These I'm not going to have to thin so much. I'm still using about 1/4 of the package. You can see there, these little seeds right there. It's better to seed light than too heavy, because the worst thing that happens is you get bigger plants. You're not going to waste them because these seeds are going to be just fine the next year. So you can save these seeds. They'll be good for a couple years. And you can even do it in succession planting. Now, same deal. I'm going to soak this in Pyrex just so that this really evenly moistens. And because it makes me feel better, I will put a little bit of, and actually in this case, I like to use dry soil mix because that way I don't get any clumps. You really want them to be able to get that light. Now, it's been really hot. I would start these off, if you can keep them nice and moist in the sun, but you may find that your lettuce is happier if you move it into the shade. You can put it in light shade, and they'll grow well in there. And in about a month, you're going to have nice little leaves, and you can cut them back and have a nice salad. You can also cut back and leave sort of the center leaves, and just cut the outside leaves, and then you can get 2 or 3 cuttings off even just this little pot. The other way you can do it is if you've got any little containers of any sort, little square containers. I save like my annual, you know, when you get the things of pansies and they come in little containers, I always throw them in the garage. I pop a little bit of the soil mix in there, and I seed it really heavy, about as much in a little thing as I just did in that pot. And what that does is that you can then start your plants in there, and then you transplant them to this pot, or several pots, or some outside and some in pots. You can do this kit in any sort of way that works for you. You could save the basil till spring and do all lettuce or all scallions or however you like to do it. But if you transplant them, you have a lot more control over how far apart they are. And you can even just do a few seeds in a little container and then transplant small plants in here. Lettuce transplants like a dream. It's very hard to kill a lettuce plant while transplanting it. Just stick your thumb down, kind of take the roots, plop, make a little hole, plop it in, water it, they take off. I have transplanted almost, you know, way too big, way too crowded plants outside into pots all over the place, and I've never really had any issues, and I still get nice sweet lettuce. And this really can stay, so these plants are really winter hardy. This could stay outside till October, November, if you can put them in a place they're not gonna get snowed on, probably even December. And you can still pull lettuce off the back. The smaller plants are actually more hardy than the big heads. If you leave the big heads out, they'll start to yellow and get kind of burnt pips, but the little plants, no problem. So that is the lettuce. Next up, we have our Evergreen Hardy Scallions. And what's neat about these is they're actually a perennial too. So you could plant some of these in your garden and some of these in a pot if you have a garden to plant in. You could plant them in a pot and then bury the pot, or you could plant them, you know, eat some, maybe water the pot and stick it in the garage. I haven't tried this, but I've done this with other plants, and pull it out in the spring for spring scallions and to transplant them into your garden. So the one thing I want to say about scallions and onions is that the seed does not last as long, in my experience, as the other two. Like I planted 3-year-old basil seed and had great germination. I planted 3-year-old lettuce seed and had great germination. I planted 2-year-old onion seed and had no germination. So these are seeds actually, I would use the scallions up first. They're not one I'd save. So I'm putting my water in. And this is the same, this is actually the same as the basil. They get a little bit of soil on top of them, but not too much. They don't need light to germinate. They are quite adaptable, but these will take longer to germinate, so definitely be patient. I've had onions take up to 2 weeks. And you know, scallions and onions are about the same in terms of growing. So just be very patient with that. So now I'm gonna put this in the pot. And I can't tell you, one thing I love more than almost anything is the smell of potting mix. It is a wonderful smell. My grandparents ran a botanic garden when I was a kid, and I spent a lot of time in greenhouses, and the smell just brings me right back. So in a lot of ways, a really relaxing, fun activity. And pretty low pressure. These are very easy plants to grow. You're gonna get something coming up, and it's gonna be delicious. And you can eat all of these at almost any stage. You lettuce really small, basil, the trimming's easy, and scallions you can eat either as babies or let them get a bit bigger. So I'm going to show you the seed. It actually looks very much like the basil seed. It's a little pointier looking. Let's see. So we want to do these. They say, what the instructions will say is put them 1/3 of an inch apart in rows and then thin to 1 inch apart if large diameter is desired. I think 1 inch is very good because we're not planting in rows in a planter. This is another time for the sprinkle technique, but I try to watch and give them a little bit more space. Not too much, because these are another thing that you can eat as a baby plant. So use about half the packet to plant this. The other ones you can either plant in another pot or in the ground. If you planted them now outside, I'm not sure how they would do, but I'm pretty sure that they would get going and still make it through the winter because evergreen hardies are very hardy plants. So now I'm taking a little bit more of that potting mix and I'm just doing my sprinkler technique, making a huge mess in the library table. Recommend this for outside, definitely. It's much easier to hose things off and patting it in. And then this again, in the Pyrex, fill the Pyrex with water or whatever you've got. You can put this in, I've got my bowl here. So put water in the bowl and just let it soak. Really wait till it's saturated all the way through, about an hour. So those are kind of what I've got for these with my growing tips. These are great little kits. There's still plenty available. Just, contact Penny Ann Public Library or the Yates County Community Center, Our Town Rocks, or the Finger Lakes Museum if you'd like to receive one. And you can always reach out to me for growing instructions or advice or support. 315-536-5123 or email me at cb239@cornell.edu. Thanks.